My son raised his glass and said, "Let's celebrate Dad while he still remembers us." Everyone laughed. I was sitting right there, soup in my lap, staring at people I once raised. Not one person stopped him. Not one defended me. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. There was a time when I meant something to them. Not just as Dad, but as the man they ran to when their knees were scraped, or when monsters were hiding in the closet. I remember their tiny hands gripping my fingers like they were holding on to the world itself. Back then, I was the world. I worked 32 years at the post office. Rain, snow, or back pain, I showed up. Never called in sick, never took a shortcut. I believed that if you showed up for your job every day, you were the kind of man who'd also show up for his family. And I did. Every single day. I didn't have much to give them in terms of wealth, but I gave them consistency. I gave them my weekends. I gave them pancakes on Sunday mornings, followed by fishing lines in the afternoon. I fixed bikes, built treehouses, and paid attention, the rarest currency in parenting. And Marjorie, my Marjorie. She was the softness to my rough edges. If I was the spine of the family, she was the soul. She made that house feel like more than wood and nails. It was her lace curtains that still hang in the living room windows, swaying gently even after all these years, as if she's still there, brushing her fingers across them. We bought the house in '79. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, but it felt like a palace. Marjorie wanted the smallest room turned into a reading nook, and I did it for her, by hand, on a single weekend, powered by black coffee and love. It's still there. Untouched. After she passed, well, the house changed. Not physically, but spiritually. Her robe still hangs on the hook in my bedroom. On some nights, when I can't sleep, I hold it in my lap and close my eyes. The scent of lavender and old fabric softener makes it feel like she's saying goodnight one last time. When the kids were little, they used to gather on the floor in front of the fireplace while I read them bedtime stories. I can still hear their giggles when I did the silly voices. They made fun of me for years over the squeaky mouse voice I gave to Whiskers the Brave. I didn't care. That laugh, their laugh, was everything. We had rules in our house. Simple ones. Say thank you. Respect your elders. Don't interrupt. And above all, family comes first. Marjorie used to say, "We're not rich, but we're rich in decency." She'd say it when the power bill was high or when the kids complained that their friends got new bikes and they didn't. We may not have much, but we have each other. There was a comfort in those years. A routine. A rhythm. The lunchboxes packed before sunrise. The dinner bell Marjorie rang from the back porch. The sound of my daughter practicing piano with 2 left hands, and my son yelling, "Touchdown," as if he were already in the NFL. Sometimes I sit in my recliner, the one Marjorie gave me for my retirement, and I can still hear echoes of those days. The creak of floorboards under rushing feet. The distant hum of Marjorie's humming while she washed dishes. The sound of a home that was once full of life. I gave them everything I had. Not out of obligation, out of love. When my son wanted to study business, I picked up extra shifts to help him with tuition. When my daughter struggled with depression after her divorce, I cooked her meals and watched her kids every weekend. I didn't keep score. That's what fathers do. But what they don't tell you is that love doesn't always come back to you. Sometimes, the more you give, the more invisible you become. Like you've poured so much of yourself into others that there's nothing left in your own hands. Looking back, there were warning signs. The phone calls got shorter. The visits became more about obligation than connection. Birthdays were texted, not celebrated. But I brushed it all off. They're busy, I told myself. Life happens. I gave them the benefit of the doubt because that's what love does, it hopes. I used to tell myself that one day, they'd come home again. Not just physically, I mean really come home. That they'd sit in the kitchen, sipping Marjorie's old tea blend, and talk about life like we used to. That we'd laugh about the time the turkey caught fire or when the dog gave birth under the Christmas tree. But that day never came. And still, I kept the house ready. Kept the porch clean. Kept their childhood rooms neat, just in case they wanted to sleep over one night for old time's sake. I didn't know that this home, this heart of mine, would become a battleground one day. I didn't know that the very people I protected would try to take what Marjorie and I built with calloused hands and Sunday prayers. But I know it now. And God help them, now, I'm wide awake. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't come charging through the front door. No, it creeps in quietly, takes off its shoes, and settles in like it belongs. The first sign was so small I almost missed it. I was talking about Marjorie at dinner, the way she used to cut the crust off the kids' sandwiches. I laughed a little, remembering how she once burned toast so bad it looked like a roof shingle. And instead of joining in, my son said, "Dad, you've told that story 100 times." He didn't say it with affection. No smile. Just irritation. I chuckled to brush it off. Well, maybe it's a good one. He didn't answer. He just went back to scrolling on his phone. A week later, I asked my daughter to help me update the Wi-Fi password. She sighed, loud enough for the neighbor to hear, and said, "Dad, it's not rocket science." Then she took the phone out of my hands and muttered something like, "Why do you even need it? You don't use anything online." I said nothing. But later that night, I sat in the recliner and looked around the room, the same room where they used to beg me to read one more bedtime story. Now they barely had the patience to hear me speak. At Thanksgiving, the turkey sat in the middle of the table, golden and perfect. I reached for the carving knife like I always did. But my son, without looking at me, picked it up and started slicing. No one said a word. Not even my daughter. That was my job. My one small ritual. I watched, hands folded, trying not to show the sting on my face. I stared at the lace curtains swaying beside the window, the ones Marjorie made, and remembered how she used to wink at me as I carved, like we were in on some inside joke. Now no one even looked in my direction. They started calling me Pops in a way that didn't feel endearing. It felt distancing. Like I was a mascot or a chore. My daughter once whispered, "Just keep him occupied," to her youngest when I offered to teach her how to play chess. The little girl smiled, bless her heart, but I caught the glance between mother and child. Like I was an errand to be run. Something to endure. Then came the photo. One day I noticed something missing in the hallway. It used to be right there, in a walnut frame, the picture of me and my son fishing on the lake. He was 10. Caught his first base that day. He smiled like the world had just handed him its crown. The photo was gone. Just gone. I asked about it. My son shrugged. "Oh, I think it cracked during cleaning. I'll print a new one." But he never did. And I never saw it again. Things like that kept happening. The garage, which used to be my space, slowly became storage for their forgotten junk. Boxes of kids' toys, unused gym equipment, plastic bins labeled with their names. I had to move my toolbox just to reach the water heater. The living room bookshelf started filling up with their stuff too, trophies they didn't want to keep but didn't want to throw away. I became the landfill of their past. I should have said something. I know that. But it's hard to speak up when you're afraid of sounding ungrateful. Afraid that if you do, they'll visit even less. So instead, I stayed quiet. I told myself they were just busy. That I was overthinking. That maybe I was changing. Maybe I was the one becoming hard to be around. The mind plays tricks on you when you start doubting your place in your own family. But something inside me, some old part of me, knew better. Knew this wasn't just distance or time. It was a shift. A slow erasure. Like I was being pushed to the edge of the frame, 1 inch at a time. I caught my granddaughter mimicking the way I walked once, hunched and slow. Everyone laughed. I did too. But later, I closed the door to my room and sat in silence for an hour. Maybe they thought I wouldn't notice. Maybe they thought old meant stupid. But I noticed everything. The missing photo. The dismissive looks. The way my son always parked in my driveway without asking, like it was already his. The way my daughter brought her friends over to show them the old house, like it was a museum. And worst of all, the way no one asked me if I was okay anymore. There was a time when they used to hold my hand just to feel safe. Now they avoided my touch like I was contagious with some slow, invisible decay. They called less. Visited less. And when they did visit, their eyes were always on the clock. Once, I asked my son if he wanted to keep the house after I passed, just trying to make conversation. He didn't hesitate. Yeah. We've already talked about that. We? That word hit me like a brick. Who is we? Not, I'll think about it. Not, we'll see. Just, yeah. The house, my house, the home Marjorie and I built, painted, repaired, lived, and mourned in, had become property to be passed down like a set of golf clubs. I didn't say anything in that moment. I nodded. Smiled even. But inside? Inside, something began to turn. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was recognition. The kind you feel when the weather shifts suddenly. When the clouds darken and the wind smells like rain. You don't see the storm yet. But you know it's coming. It happened on a Saturday. The kind of warm, quiet afternoon where you'd expect peace, not heartbreak. I had just finished watering the front garden. Marjorie's garden. She loved those rose bushes like children. I still talk to them sometimes when I'm out there. Sounds silly, I know, but they never talk back or roll their eyes. When I walked around to the garage to put the hose away, something stopped me cold. Boxes. Labeled in thick black marker. Estate sale, Dad's tools. Garage, old junk. Donate? I stood there staring at them like I was reading my own obituary. My hands shook as I opened one. My socket set, the one Marjorie gave me for our 10th anniversary, tossed in beside rusted nails and some broken extension cords. No wrapping. No care. The things I built this house with. Gone in a box like leftover yard sale scraps. I heard voices coming from inside, so I stepped through the side door. My son and daughter were in the kitchen, laughing over coffee. Calm. Relaxed. I cleared my throat. They looked up, startled, not guilty, just annoyed. What's all that in the garage? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. My son glanced at my daughter. Oh, we assumed you'd be okay with getting rid of some of the old stuff. You haven't touched it in years, Dad. I didn't say you could take any of it. It's just tools, Pops. No one uses those anymore. I looked at my daughter, hoping for support. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Some of it's sentimental, I said quietly. My son scoffed. Then label the sentimental stuff and we'll leave it. That's when it hit me, I was being asked to inventory my memories, or lose them. I said nothing and walked back out, but my feet didn't take me to the garden. They led me to the garage. I stood in the doorway, staring at everything, not just tools, but my life. The baseball glove I caught my son's first pop fly with. The old snow shovel I used to clear the driveway every winter, even when my knees screamed in protest. A lantern Marjorie and I once used when the power went out and we read books by candlelight. None of it was junk. None of it was for sale. It was mine. And they didn't even ask. A few weeks later, they hosted a barbecue at my house. I didn't ask for it, they just told me. Said they'd take care of everything. They brought their friends, neighbors, people I barely recognized. I stayed on the porch for most of it, nursing a glass of sweet tea and trying not to feel like a guest in my own home. Then it happened. I was sitting in my recliner, the one Marjorie gave me when I retired. It was the only thing I ever asked to keep untouched. A woman I didn't know walked up, plopped down on the armrest, and said, "Oh, this must be that old recliner you're selling." Before I could answer, my son appeared behind her. "We're letting it go," he said. "Dad barely uses it. It's all saggy now." He laughed. People chuckled. I was still sitting in it. He gestured for me to get up. "Come on, old man. Let her try it." I stood, slowly. Not out of obedience, out of shock. The kind of numb disbelief where you do things without realizing. She sat down and rocked back in it, smiling. I walked out of the living room and into the hallway. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stood by the wall where that fishing photo used to hang and stared at the empty nail. That night, when everyone was gone, I checked the garage again. More boxes. Labeled now with sticky notes, recliner, pick up Sunday. I stood in the kitchen, my hand resting on Marjorie's tea kettle. I whispered to her like I always do when no one's listening. "They gave it away, Marge. The chair you picked out. The one you said would last me till the end. Guess they think the end's already here." The silence answered me. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat at the kitchen table, the old analog clock ticking behind me like a soft, cruel metronome. Every second felt like it was measuring how far I'd drifted from the people I once knew. You expect to grow old. You don't expect to be discarded. I started withdrawing after that. Stopped asking them to stay for dinner. Stopped suggesting movie nights or day trips. If I was just a guest in my home, then fine, I'd stay quiet like a good guest should. But inside? Something was splintering. The worst part wasn't the disrespect. It was the silence from the rest of them. My daughter saw what happened that day with the recliner. She didn't laugh, but she didn't stop it either. My granddaughter sat in the corner with her headphones on, completely disconnected, like the house meant nothing to her anymore. It wasn't just what they did. It was what they allowed. And that kind of betrayal? That's the kind that stains deep. I started avoiding the main living areas. I'd stay in the bedroom with the door closed. Sat in the old rocker by the window, wrapped in Marjorie's robe, staring out at the street. One day, my neighbor Paul waved from his porch. I didn't wave back. Not because I didn't want to. Because I wasn't sure I still knew how. I didn't ask to become invisible. I didn't ask for silence, or distance, or for my home to be treated like an asset on someone's spreadsheet. But at some point, while I was making toast and paying property taxes and fixing the upstairs sink, they started planning my exit. Behind closed doors. Whispered words. Half-heard conversations that trailed off when I walked into the room. I should have known something was wrong the day I found my daughter in the spare bedroom, measuring the walls with her phone. Thinking of repainting? I joked. She froze. Smiled tight. Just curious. Curious. In my house. Later that evening, she was on the phone with someone, pacing the back porch. She thought I couldn't hear. But I was sitting just inside the window, lights off, the way older folks do when we don't want to disturb anyone. I heard her say it. "We'll keep the kitchen mostly as is. He's always in his room now anyway." That was me she was talking about. Not Dad. Not my father. Just, he. I should have confronted her. Should have demanded to know what she was talking about. But I didn't. I just stood in the dark, holding Marjorie's old robe against my chest like a shield. That night, I couldn't sleep. I got up around 2 a.m. to make tea, one of Marjorie's old rituals that still brought me calm. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I walked past my son's coat on the back of the chair and noticed a binder sticking out of his work bag. I don't snoop. I never have. But something about the way it was positioned, like it wanted to be found, made my fingers move before my conscience could stop me. It was blue. Leather. Professional. Inside, neatly printed tabs. Labeled. End-of-life planning. Memorial budget. Guest list. Obituary drafts. At first, I thought it was for someone else. Maybe a client. Maybe a community service thing. But no. Page 3 had my name on it. Celebration of life, proposed agenda. Slideshow, photos of Dad from early years. Reading of prepared eulogy, son. Light refreshments to follow. I flipped to the back. A bulleted list. Cold. Clean. Contact realtor once house cleared. Transfer utilities to daughter's name. Remove garage contents before listing. Collect remaining valuables. Notify bank of death certificate. Apply for probate if will is unclear. I don't know how long I stood there. My legs went numb. My ears buzzed. My funeral. While I was still breathing. My death wasn't just expected. It was scheduled. I dropped the binder back into the bag and stumbled down the hall to the bedroom. The moment I closed the door behind me, I broke. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled Marjorie's robe from the hook, and buried my face in it. Not to smell her. Not to feel close. Just to muffle the sounds of a grown man sobbing like a child. I kept whispering the same thing over and over. You wouldn't believe what they're doing, Marge. You wouldn't believe it. The next morning, I made breakfast as usual. Oatmeal. Bananas. Coffee. Sat at the table and pretended everything was fine. That's what we do when we've been cornered but don't know how to fight. They were talking about weekend plans. A cookout. Maybe inviting some friends over. My son said something about keeping the vibe light. My daughter nodded, distracted on her phone. I just listened. But this time, not like before. This time I was listening differently. Listening to tones, to glances, to what wasn't being said. And I started seeing it everywhere. The way my granddaughter asked, "Will Grandpa's room be mine when I go to college?" The way my son waved off my suggestion to have a family game night. "Let's not tire you out, Pops." The way my daughter whispered to her husband in the hallway, "It's better to have things settled before he starts losing it." They weren't just pulling away. They were planning to replace me. Erase me. The man who built the house, who raised them, who held Marjorie's hand through chemo, who paid for their braces and their college textbooks, was now just a logistical obstacle. A delay in their financial timeline. I walked the property that afternoon. Every corner. Every room. The attic with the dusty photo albums. The garage with the old nail bucket. The backyard Marjorie once turned into a summer jungle with wildflowers and tomato plants. It was all mine. But they had already divided it. In their minds, it belonged to them. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just distance. This wasn't just modern kids being distracted or cold. This was a scheme. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were moving forward as if I already had. And that, somehow, was worse than any slap to the face or cruel word. They hadn't even given me the dignity of a goodbye. Just spreadsheets, sticky notes, and whispered conversations on porches. But they forgot one thing. I'm still here. I may be slow on my feet. I may forget where I put my glasses. But my mind? It's not gone. And my heart? Well, it's cracked, but it's not empty. It's still filled with the woman who told me one thing the night before she passed. Don't let them treat this house like a shell, Henry. It's not just walls. It's us. She was right. They wanted to bury me early. But I wasn't ready for the grave. Not yet. Not by a long shot. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. The next morning, I asked my son a simple question. What's this binder in your bag? He looked up from his coffee, barely blinking. What binder? I kept my tone calm. Too calm. The one with my funeral details. He laughed. Actually laughed. You're not serious. My daughter, sitting across the table, froze mid-bite. I found it, I said, still not raising my voice. Celebration of life. Guest list. Memorial slideshow. Selling the house. He leaned back in his chair. Dad, you're reading too much into that. So it's not real? It's just planning. Preparing. You wouldn't understand, but these things matter legally. It's not like we're digging a grave in the backyard. I turned to my daughter. And you? Measuring rooms for what, renovation? She swallowed hard. Dad, don't make this emotional. We're just being responsible. I looked at them both. Two adults I raised. Two people who used to cry in my arms and now stared at me like I was inconvenient. I'm not dead, I said. My son chuckled. You're not getting any younger, either. He said it like a joke. But it didn't land. Not with me. And I didn't respond. I just stood up and walked out the back door. That was the first time I truly saw them for what they were becoming, not monsters, no. Just, entitled. Distant. Willing to reshape the narrative of my life before I had even left the room. It was raining that day. Light drizzle. I stood under the porch and watched it soak the empty swing Marjorie used to read on. For a second, I imagined her there, legs crossed, book in hand, head tilted like she was listening to the weather breathe. I miss you, I whispered. That night, I started writing. Not a journal. A list. Every date, every sentence. What they said. What they moved. What they planned. Just in case. The next day, I took a walk around the block, something I hadn't done in a while. My legs aren't what they used to be, but I needed air. Space. My neighbor Paul was on his porch, sanding a birdhouse. Henry, he called, long time. I nodded, came up to the fence. You look tired, he said. Feels like the world's turning without me. He wiped his hands. That your kids' cars I see parked out front every day? I nodded again. He raised an eyebrow. They visiting, or circling? I looked up. Circling, I said quietly. Paul didn't push. He just nodded and reached into his tool belt. He handed me a pencil. Keep notes. Don't trust memory alone. I held that pencil like it was a weapon. Or a gift. Thanks, I said. Old men aren't fools, he said. They just get quieter. That's when folks start thinking they've won. That night, I went into the attic. I hadn't been up there since Marjorie passed. The stairs creaked like they were warning me. Dust hung in the air like breath held too long. I opened the first box. Letters. Photos. The mortgage deed. A framed poem Marjorie wrote me on our 25th anniversary. I sat cross-legged on the floor and cried into her handwriting. Then I found something else, something I didn't remember tucking away. A copy of our original will. The old version. The one we made before the kids grew cold. It named them both as beneficiaries. Joint owners of the house. It felt like betrayal all over again. Not from her, from me. Forever thinking they'd protect this place the way we did. I came downstairs gripping that old will like it was a grenade. The next morning, I called Jerry. My friend from church. Retired lawyer. Played chess with me every Sunday for 20 years. When he picked up, I said only one word. Help. He didn't ask why. Just said, come over tomorrow. Back at the house, things got quieter. My daughter was suddenly more polite. My son started checking in before moving things. It wasn't guilt. It was caution. I had disturbed the script. I wasn't the passive man in the recliner anymore. I started waking up before them. Making coffee first. Reading the paper front to back. Refusing help when they offered it, not out of pride, but power. They started noticing. And they didn't like it. You've been acting weird, Dad, my son said one morning. I sipped my coffee. Alive weird, or funeral weird? He didn't laugh. Good. For the first time in weeks, I looked around the house and felt something shift. The walls were still mine. The memories still echoed. And I still had time. Maybe not a lot. But enough. Enough to make sure that if they wanted to play God with my life, they'd find out just how alive the old man still was. Jerry hadn't changed a bit. Still wore those old corduroy jackets with elbow patches and smelled faintly of pipe tobacco, even though his wife made him quit years ago. He opened the door before I could knock, gave me a long look, and said, "You look like a man who's been through something." "I have," I replied. "And I think I'm still in it." His office was the converted sunroom off the side of his house, warm light, dusty legal books, a little plaque that read, "Justice is doing the right thing even when it costs you everything." It used to be a joke between us. Today, it didn't feel funny. We sat down, and I laid out the binder I had found in my son's bag. Jerry scanned it slowly, page by page, not speaking. When he was done, he closed the folder gently and set it on the table like it might explode. "You want to change your will?" he asked. "I need to," I said. "You sure this isn't an emotional decision?" I met his eyes. "They already buried me, Jerry. This is self-defense." He nodded once. "Let's begin." It wasn't easy. Not legally, and certainly not emotionally. Jerry asked the hard questions. Who gets what? Do you want to leave anything to the children? Any specific possessions? Do you want to make your wishes contest-proof? I want it airtight, I told him. If they try to undo this, they lose everything. So a forfeiture clause? Yes. If either of them contests the will, all assets go to charity. Which one? I didn't hesitate. Veterans Housing Network. Jerry raised an eyebrow. That personal? I looked out the window, eyes narrowing on a memory. My father was a veteran. Taught me honor. Something my kids seem to have misplaced. He nodded again. What about the house? That's the most important part. I took a deep breath. I want it renamed in the deed, Marjorie's house. They don't sell it. They don't gut it. They don't flip it for profit. Jerry leaned back in his chair. You know this is going to break the family. I smiled. A sad, tired smile. Jerry, they already broke it. We spent the rest of the day combing through every detail. Power of attorney revoked. Medical directives updated. Emergency contacts changed. And at the very end, Jerry slid the final page in front of me. You ready? He asked. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at the window, the sun pouring through the glass the same way it used to when Marjorie and I would sit on this very porch, sipping sweet tea and dreaming about our kids' futures. They'd have a future, all right. Just not the one they thought they were entitled to. I signed. The pen didn't even tremble. "You want copies?" Jerry asked. "2," I said. "One for me. One for the safe." As I gathered the papers, Jerry placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're doing this with dignity," he said. "Not out of spite." I nodded. They mistook silence for surrender. He smiled. "Common mistake." On the way home, I stopped by the florist. Bought a single yellow rose, Marjorie's favorite. I laid it on her old pillow when I got back. "Done," I whispered. "Your name will stay on this house." I made sure of it. That night, I made tea the way she used to. Sat in the rocker. Read from her old book of Psalms. And for the first time in months, I slept with the bedroom door open. In the days that followed, I moved differently. Lighter, somehow. Not because the pain was gone, but because it had a place now. A purpose. I took long walks. Ate slower. Watched the birds gather on the porch rail without feeling like time was chasing me down. The kids noticed. "You've been upbeat," my daughter said one morning. "Just grateful," I replied. My son narrowed his eyes. "You've been going somewhere?" "Library," I said, smiling. "Legal section." He laughed awkwardly, but I saw it, the flicker of fear behind the grin. "Good. Let them wonder. Let them question what I knew and when I knew it." I wasn't playing the game anymore. I was writing the rules. One evening, I caught my granddaughter in the hallway, looking through an old photo album I'd left on the table. She pointed to a picture of me and Marjorie, standing in front of the newly purchased house. "You look happy," she said. I replied. That day, we didn't have much, just each other. But it felt like enough. She looked up. "Do you miss her?" "Every minute." She nodded, eyes glassy. Then she asked something no one else had. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" And just like that, in 6 words, she gave me more dignity than her parents had in 6 months. I ruffled her hair gently. "I am now." The next morning, I opened the safe. Took out the copy of the new will. Held it in my hands. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like protection. A final promise to the woman I loved. And a reminder to my children. This house has walls that remember. And now? Now it has boundaries, too. I thought I'd already seen the worst of it. Thought I'd taken every low blow, every subtle insult, every twist of the knife with as much grace as a man could manage. But they hadn't finished yet. It was a Tuesday morning. Quiet. Birds outside, coffee brewing, the house still stretching its arms after sleep. My son came into the kitchen, papers in hand. He looked casual, too casual, like someone about to sell you something you didn't ask for. "Hey, Dad," he said, sitting across from me. "Got something that'll help simplify things around here." He laid the papers out neatly on the table. "I had this drawn up. It's just a basic power of attorney. Gives me authority to handle your finances and medical stuff. Nothing dramatic." I didn't touch it. He pushed it a little closer. "This way, we can make decisions quickly if you're, unable to." Unable. That word. I read the top line. Legalese. Blocks of text meant to confuse and comfort at the same time. "You trust me, right?" he added, that same artificial smile playing on his face. I looked at the signature line. Looked back at him. And I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly timed. The will was signed. The copies were stored. The clause was in place. He didn't know it yet, but I wasn't the one with something to lose. I kept my tone even. Let me read it over. His smile faltered. Just for a second. Sure. Of course. He left the room. I stared at the document for a long time. Read every word. Saw how cleverly it was written, subtle powers tucked between the lines. Health decisions. Banking access. Real estate authority. With this paper, he could sell the house while I was asleep. He was gambling on my trust. But trust has a shelf life. That evening, I went out back and stood in the yard as the sun dropped low behind the trees. The same yard where Marjorie used to hang laundry. Where my kids once ran barefoot through the grass with jelly-stained faces. Now the grass felt unfamiliar. Trimmed too short. Sterile. Like they were preparing it for a showing. I took a deep breath and said it out loud, just to hear it. They're trying to erase me. The next morning, I packed a small overnight bag. Just in case. A few clothes, a copy of the will, and the original house deed. I placed the bag under the bed, behind a panel Marjorie and I used to hide Christmas gifts in. Then I went into the living room, looked at the recliner that was supposed to be gone by now, and sat in it like I was claiming it all over again. They were going to take everything, until I said no. A few days passed. They were cautious, now. My daughter asked questions more politely. My son knocked before walking into my room. But the undercurrent was the same. They were waiting. Then, it came. A white envelope. No return address. I found it on the kitchen counter with a note scribbled in my daughter's handwriting. Open this when you're ready. We thought it'd be a nice gesture. I opened it. Inside was an invitation. In loving anticipation, a celebration of life for our beloved father, Henry. The date? That Saturday. The location? My own backyard. I blinked. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't metaphor. They were hosting my memorial while I was alive. They'd scheduled speeches. A slideshow. Light refreshments and shared memories. I read the words again and again. My hands didn't tremble. They should have. But there was something peaceful about the rage I felt. It didn't explode. It simmered, slow, steady, focused. I wasn't confused. I wasn't hurt. I was ready. They wanted to bury me alive? Fine. I'd show up in a suit. And I'd bring the truth with me. I went to the closet. Pulled out Marjorie's Sunday dress, the one I hadn't touched since the funeral. Laid it across the bed. Let the sunlight catch the edges of the fabric. This is for you, Marge, I whispered. You always said I was too soft. That night, I polished my shoes. Ironed my shirt. Printed 2 copies of the will. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a speech. Not out of anger. But out of love for everything they were about to throw away, and everything I was about to protect. I arrived 10 minutes early. Wearing my best suit. The same one I wore to Marjorie's funeral. Crisp black. Pressed white shirt. A navy blue tie she picked out for me once because she said it made me look distinguished, not ancient. I parked 3 blocks away. Walked to my own house like a guest arriving at a party he wasn't invited to. The backyard was full. Folding chairs, white balloons, finger sandwiches. There was even a speaker playing soft music, instrumental hymns that made it feel like an actual memorial. At the front, on a table under a photo of me smiling with a fishing rod, was a guest book. It read, "Share your favorite memory of Dad." I stared at it. Then picked up the pen and wrote one line. He lived long enough to watch them write his ending for him. I set the pen down. Took a breath. Then stepped into the crowd. Someone gasped. A woman I didn't recognize dropped her paper plate. A man elbowed the person next to him. My daughter was at the front, talking to a small group, when she turned, and her face froze. My son was behind the drink table, pouring lemonade. He went still, like a statue. The color drained from his face. I walked up the center aisle of chairs. Slowly. Calmly. Not a word spoken yet. My son found his voice first. Dad, I raised a hand. Not to silence him. Just to say, not yet. I turned to the guests. I wasn't going to speak today, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Mostly because I didn't know I was supposed to be dead. No one moved. No one laughed. I pulled the invitation from my jacket and held it up. I received this a few days ago. A celebration of life, while I still have one. A few murmurs in the crowd. I stepped forward and looked directly at my daughter. I found the binder. The sale plans. The room measurements. The funeral script. I saw everything. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I turned to the rest. This house, this life, was not a favor to me. It was something I built. Brick by brick. Memory by memory. I reached into my coat and pulled out a document. My children assumed they'd own this house. That once I was gone, they'd inherit the walls, the floors, the garden Marjorie planted with her bare hands. I held it up. This is the new will. Whispers. My son took a step forward. Dad, we can talk about this later. No, I said. Calm. Steady. We'll talk now. In front of your friends. Since you planned my memorial in front of strangers. I opened the folder. My house, Marjorie's house, is no longer in your names. If either of you contests it, everything goes to a veterans' charity. Every penny. I turned back to the crowd. Some of you here may be wondering what happened. Why a father would do this. I paused. They planned my ending. While I was still making tea. While I was still fixing hinges and paying bills. While I was still alive. No one said a word. I folded the document and tucked it back inside my coat. I'm not angry, I said. But I'm not invisible either. I looked at my son. At some point, I became a burden in your eyes. I looked at my daughter. An afterthought. I scanned the crowd. I came today not to ruin a moment, but to reclaim one. I pointed to the photo on the table. That man is still breathing. Then I walked away. No one stopped me. No one clapped. No one laughed. Just silence. Thick. Heavy. Earned. I stepped back into the house, closed the door behind me, and leaned against it. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weak. I felt whole. The house was quiet, but not empty. It was mine again. They stayed out there for a while. I could hear muffled voices, awkward farewells, the soft closing of car doors. Then they were gone. Later that evening, I made myself dinner. A simple grilled cheese and tomato soup, Marjorie's favorite comfort meal. I ate at the kitchen table. Alone. But not lonely. I glanced toward the hallway, where a shadow lingered just beyond the arch. My granddaughter. She stepped forward slowly, eyes wide. You really changed the will? I did. She looked down at her feet. Why? I gave her a moment. Then said, because people shouldn't be rewarded for showing up to your funeral early. She blinked, tears forming. I didn't know. I believe you, I said gently. And I did. She nodded, then turned, but paused at the doorway. I'm glad you showed up. Then she was gone. And I was left in the house that no longer felt like it was being taken from me. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the wind play with the curtains through the open windows. The house breathed with me. Alive. Just like me. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The next morning, the house was quiet. No voices in the hallway. No footsteps down the stairs. No muttered kitchen chatter over coffee and toast. They were gone. Not just physically, gone from the air, the walls, the way sound used to move through this place when they filled it with their assumptions. And honestly, the silence was a relief. I stood in the living room, looking around like someone seeing it for the first time. The same furniture. Same shelves. Same walls. But it felt different now. Like the house had exhaled. Like it was no longer holding its breath, waiting to be sold, cleared out, or rewritten. I opened the front door and let the morning breeze move through the house. Let it shake off the stale scent of tension that had settled in every corner. I wanted this place to smell like home again, not like fear, or pressure, or preparation for death. Word got out, of course. In towns like mine, news spreads faster than fire in dry grass. At the diner the next day, people glanced at me a little longer than usual. I caught bits of whispers. That's the guy, funeral while alive. Said the will changed, real dramatic. Some smiled with respect. Others just looked uncomfortable, like they didn't know whether to pity me or admire me. Paul, my neighbor, came by that afternoon. Brought me a peach cobbler, store-bought, but it was the thought that counted. Whole town's buzzing, he said, leaning on the porch rail beside me. Never heard of someone crashing their own memorial. Neither had I said. But I recommend it. He laughed. You okay? I nodded. I think I am. Good, he said. Took guts. Real guts. He left not long after, but I appreciated the visit. Sometimes it only takes one person to remind you that you're still part of the world. That evening, I made myself dinner. Chicken breast. Roasted carrots. I set the table for one, but out of habit, and maybe a little hope, I placed a second plate across from me. It stayed empty. Still, I spoke softly, like Marjorie was sitting there with her napkin in her lap, smiling gently. House feels cleaner now, I said. Like it's breathing easier. I paused. I don't know if they'll come back. Not the same, anyway. The lace curtain swayed in response. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm. Mornings with coffee. Afternoons with crossword puzzles and walks around the block. Evenings sitting in the rocker, watching the sunset spill gold across the porch. On the fourth day, something unexpected happened. I found a small package by the mailbox. Inside was a repainted sign. Wooden. Hand-lettered. Marjorie's house. No note. No signature. But I recognized the handwriting. My granddaughter's, the same slanted letters from old birthday cards she used to make me. I held the sign in my lap for a while before taking it to the front gate. Hung it there with fresh nails and tightened every screw myself. Neighbors passed by and saw it. One of them, an older woman I barely knew, nodded at me and said, "Beautiful name for a home." And it was. That night, I walked from room to room. Not aimless. Purposeful. I dusted. I straightened the pictures. I placed Marjorie's robe neatly across the bed. I wasn't just cleaning. I was reclaiming. I no longer felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I was the keeper of something sacred. And slowly, the house started feeling like her again. Like us again. The piano in the corner hadn't been played in years, but I opened it. Pressed a single key. It rang out, pure and unafraid. On Sunday, I went to church. Sat in the same pew Marjorie and I always did. People stared. Some smiled. One woman offered a hug. After service, Pastor Hill came over. I heard what happened, he said. I'm sure everyone has. Do you want to talk about it? I shook my head. I already did. Loud enough for all of them to hear. He smiled. Well, if you ever want to talk about what comes next. I paused, then asked, is it wrong that I feel more peaceful now than I have in years? He shook his head. Sometimes, peace comes after pruning. You don't hate the tree for dropping dead limbs. I liked that. That night, I walked through the backyard. The grass needed trimming. The garden beds were half wild. But it felt alive. I knelt by Marjorie's rose bushes, pulled a few weeds, then just sat there, hands in the dirt. That's when I realized, I hadn't cried once since the funeral. That wasn't. Not because I was numb. But because I had already done my grieving. Not just for Marjorie. But for the version of my family I thought still existed. Now, I was starting fresh. Maybe they'd come back one day. Maybe they wouldn't. But the house? The name? My story? That was mine again. The idea didn't come in a lightning flash. It came slowly, quietly, like the way dawn creeps into a room before you've even realized the night is over. It started with a visit. Her name was Clara. I hadn't seen her since Marjorie's service, but she recognized me right away when we bumped into each other at the church food drive. Henry, she said, I heard what happened. Of course she had. I braced myself for pity. But she just smiled softly. I always knew you'd do something bold before the end. We sat on a bench outside, paper coffee cups in hand, the autumn breeze tugging at our jackets. Clara ran a local nonprofit, a transitional housing program for women veterans. She told me they were outgrowing their space. Waiting lists were long. Resources, short. I asked questions. She answered with passion. They don't just need beds, Henry, she said. They need healing. Community. A place that feels like a home, not an institution. Something in my chest stirred. Later that night, I walked the halls of my house again. Only this time, I didn't see what was missing. I saw what it could become. I stood in the spare bedroom, the one my daughter wanted to repaint. I imagined a bunk bed there, a bookshelf with donated novels, maybe a corkboard filled with job listings and handwritten prayers. I stood in Marjorie's reading nook and pictured it filled with sunlight and quiet, a space where someone could breathe without feeling watched or judged. I saw life again. Not mine. Theirs. And something clicked. The house didn't need to be a monument to what I'd lost. It could be a beginning. The next morning, I called Clara. Come over, I said. I want to show you something. She walked through each room with reverence, not as a guest, but as someone already seeing possibility. This could work, she said quietly. This could really work. We sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and made a list. 3 bedrooms for transitional use. Reading nook converted into therapy space. Garage cleared for donations and supplies. Dining room large enough for communal meals. My own room, left untouched, a caretaker's quarters. We worked for hours, and when she left, I stood on the porch and watched her drive off with Hope riding shotgun. Then I got to work. Not grand, dramatic work. Real work. I opened every window. I cleaned. I cleared out closets and boxed up the relics I no longer needed. I found Marjorie's sewing machine, dusted it off, and placed it in the living room. Thought maybe someone might use it again. I visited the hardware store and bought paint, soft blues, warm whites. Colors Marjorie would have liked. Nothing cold. Nothing sterile. Paul came over when he saw me struggling with a ladder. "What are you up to now?" he asked. I told him. He didn't even hesitate. "I'll bring my tool belt tomorrow." Others followed. Mrs. Jensen from down the block brought curtains she'd sewn herself. A teenage boy from church offered to mow the lawn every weekend. The local carpenter volunteered to build shelving for books and storage. The town that whispered about my funeral started showing up for my resurrection. Weeks passed. And with each coat of paint, with each tightened screw and swept floor, the house felt more alive. I kept Marjorie's touches in every room. Her framed quilt square hung above the fireplace. Her tea set was placed on a tray in the new community room. A photo of her tending the garden sat on the windowsill, overlooking the same soil. One evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the trees, and Clara joined me again. "You sure about this, Henry?" she asked. "I've never been more sure." She nodded. "You're not just giving them a roof. I know. You're giving them dignity." I looked at her. That's the only thing I ever wanted back. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen, the one Marjorie used to light during storms. And I whispered into the flickering glow. "You said don't let them turn this house into a shell." I didn't, Marge. I turned it into shelter. The house, now truly named Marjorie's house, wasn't just mine anymore. But somehow, it felt more like home than it had in years. The first woman arrived on a Tuesday. Her name was Linda. Former Army nurse. Mid-40s. Carried one duffel bag in a thick kind of silence that told you she'd been through more than she'd ever say. She stepped into the house like it might vanish beneath her feet. "This is really it?" she asked. "This is Marjorie's house," I replied. "And yes. It's yours now, too." She blinked fast, looked away, then walked down the hallway to the room with the soft blue walls. She didn't cry. But I did. Quietly. After she closed the door. By Friday, we had 4 residents. Each with their own stories. One had survived a bad marriage. Another was battling PTSD. All of them walked in like ghosts, and slowly came back to life. They helped with chores. They planted herbs in the garden beds. They turned Marjorie's reading nook into a little library and meditation space, complete with an open-when-needed box of tissues and a clipboard with daily affirmations. I didn't give orders. I didn't need to. They treated the house with respect my own blood never did. One morning, I came into the kitchen and found Linda already cooking. "Sit, Grandpa," she said playfully, waving a spatula. "I'm making you breakfast." I chuckled. Only Marjorie ever called me Grandpa. She smiled. "Well, she's not here, so someone's gotta." Over eggs and toast, she asked about the house, about Marjorie, about me. And unlike my children, she listened. Not just with ears, with heart. "You built this place with love," she said. "We can feel it in the walls." That afternoon, another woman named Tanya started scrubbing the front steps. I asked her why, and she shrugged. "Because it matters." That night, I sat on the porch and listened to laughter coming from the kitchen. Real laughter. Belly deep and healing. Something I hadn't heard in this house since before Marjorie got sick. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a lonely old man in a relic of a home. I felt like part of something again. Clara dropped by often, bringing supplies, helping organize. We shared coffee and long talks about purpose, about aging, about how family wasn't always the people who shared your blood, but the ones who showed up when no one else did. "You've started something here, Henry," she told me one evening. Something real. I looked around the dining room where 3 of the women were playing cards and laughing. I didn't start it, I said. Marjorie did. I'm just following her lead. A few days later, something unexpected happened. A knock at the door. I opened it, and there she was. My granddaughter. She looked nervous. Her hands clutched a small covered dish. I brought pie, she said. I nodded, stepped aside. We sat in the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and baked apples settling between us. For a while, we didn't speak. Then she said, I didn't know what they were planning. Not really. I believe you. I should have asked. Should have seen it. You were young, I said. And maybe scared to speak up. She looked down. I always thought you'd live forever. I smiled. So did I. She exhaled, tears threatening. I'm sorry. I nodded slowly. Thank you. She stayed for an hour. Ate 2 slices of pie. Asked questions about the women living here. Smiled when I told her about Linda's chicken soup and Tanya's obsession with hummingbird feeders. Before she left, she stood in the doorway and hesitated. Then she said something I'll never forget. You were the one who taught me to speak up. I didn't. I'm sorry. But I want to be better. Can I visit again? I reached for her hand, squeezed it gently. This house has room. The next week, she brought books. Said the women might like them. Helped Tanya scrub the back deck. Sat with Linda and asked about her service. She didn't just return. She arrived. And something about that felt like healing. The kind that didn't demand an apology from the past, just a better effort in the present. The rest of the family stayed away. No calls. No letters. No explanations. But I didn't grieve them anymore. I had real people now. Real community. Real family. Not by birth. By choice. And that made all the difference. It was a gray Sunday when she came back. No call. No warning. Just a knock at the door, quiet and hesitant, like the wind tapping against the glass. I opened it. There she stood. My daughter. Hair tied back. No makeup. No jewelry. Just a plain coat and eyes full of everything she'd never said. Can I come in? She asked softly. I nodded once and stepped aside. She walked slowly through the hallway, looking at the walls like she didn't recognize them. Like they weren't hers anymore. They weren't. She stood in the living room, hands tucked into her sleeves. Looked around at the photographs, the newer ones. Not of her or her brother. Of Linda laughing. Tanya in the garden. Clara leading a workshop in the dining room. And then she saw the sign above the fireplace. Marjorie's house. She stared at it for a long time. I didn't expect you to go through with it, she said finally. I didn't expect you to plan my funeral before I was dead, I replied. Silence. She nodded. Took a seat on the edge of the couch. I remained standing. She looked up at me. Eyes red-rimmed. Do you hate me? The question hit me harder than I expected. I didn't answer right away. I sat down across from her. No, I said. But I don't trust you. She swallowed hard. That's fair. More silence. She looked down at her hands. When Mom died, something in me shut off. I didn't know how to be your daughter without her around to guide it. You were so quiet. And I was so angry all the time. I wasn't quiet, I said gently. You just stopped listening. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I thought I was doing the right thing. Taking control. Planning ahead. You were planning for your comfort, I said. Not my care. She winced. Didn't argue. And him? I asked. Your brother? She shook her head. He doesn't get it. He thinks you embarrassed us. I smiled. Good. That made her look up. I wanted him to feel it, I said. The way I felt when you sold my presents before I'd even left the room. She nodded slowly. I don't expect you to forgive me. I haven't. I don't deserve it. Not yet. More silence. Then she asked, why didn't you just cut us out completely? I looked at the photo on the mantel, Marjorie in her garden, sun on her face. Because your mother wouldn't have. That broke her. She covered her mouth, sobbing into her palms. I didn't move. Didn't rush to comfort her. That wasn't my job anymore. Eventually, she composed herself. I want to help, she said. Not because I want back in the will. I know that door's closed. But because I want to be better than I was. I studied her face. Tired. Honest. You're not ready to be my daughter again, I said. But maybe, you can be a part of this house. She looked surprised. You'd let me? This house forgives before I do. She nodded. We didn't hug. That was for old US. I walked her to the porch. As she stepped outside, she paused at the edge of the stairs. Thank you, she said. I didn't say it back. Not yet. I watched her walk down the path. At the mailbox, she stopped. Ran her fingers across the hand-painted sign. Marjorie's house. She looked back at me. I raised a hand. Not a wave. Not a welcome. Just, acknowledgement. That was enough. For now. Could you forgive your own child after a betrayal like this? Let us know in the comments below. The house wakes early these days. By 6:30, someone's in the kitchen boiling water for tea. Linda hums gospel as she stirs oatmeal. Tanya's usually already outside, checking the herb beds and waving at joggers like she's lived here her whole life. Sometimes, I sit on the porch just to listen. It's not the laughter of children anymore. Not the frantic pitter-patter of tiny feet or the sound of Marjorie shouting for someone to bring in the laundry before it rains. But it's life. A different kind. A quieter one. But no less real. We have a rhythm now. A chalkboard calendar in the hallway lists community dinners, therapy check-ins, job interviews, and volunteer shifts. Every week, we erase it and start again, fresh and full. Every Thursday, Clara drops off donations. Sometimes food, sometimes furniture. Last week, she brought a brand new bookshelf someone from her church had built just for us. Tanya cried when she saw it. This place, she whispered, isn't just shelter. It's soul. There are still quiet days. Still hard moments. Tears behind closed doors. Anxiety attacks. Nights when someone can't sleep and just sits with a cup of tea at the table, staring at the window, trying to breathe. I join them when I can. I don't give advice. I just sit. Because sometimes, what people need isn't fixing. They need witness. The town sees the change. What used to be a dying home with an old man inside has become something more, a living story. We got a letter from the town council last week. A plaque too. In honor of a home that heals, Marjorie's house. I hung it beside the front door. Right where everyone can see it. And every time I pass it, I think of her. Of how she used to make soup when the neighbors got sick. Of how she made the house warm with nothing more than cinnamon and a dish towel slung over her shoulder. She didn't live to see this. But in a way, she built it. All of it. Every kind gesture, every quiet act of care, it formed the blueprint for what this place has become. She was the roots. I just kept watering. One morning, Linda brought home a small potted tree. Symbolic, she said. New roots, new life. We planted it in the backyard, near the rose bushes. They're still there. Still blooming. Just like her. Just like this house. Some nights, I sit in the rocker with a blanket over my knees and watch the lights flick on one by one, the way a house comes alive slowly, like a face waking up after a long sleep. I listen to their voices from inside, soft, steady, familiar. I smile. Not because everything is perfect. But because, finally, everything is honest. And I think to myself. I wasn't buried at that fake funeral. I was resurrected. And in the process, so was this home.